He thought money could buy respect, that arrogance could silence anyone. But tonight, in a crowded restaurant, a billionaire mocked a boy who couldn't hear. And in that moment, a waitress stepped in. One simple act, one brave gesture. And suddenly, the arrogant man realized he had underestimated a child, a father, and a lesson money could never buy. Watch closely, because what happens next will shock you and warm your heart at the same time. Some people think money can buy everything, but tonight, one arrogant billionaire would learn the hardest lesson of his life. The restaurant was a palace of glittering lights and soft jazz, a place where the city's wealthiest came to flaunt their success. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars, and marble floors reflected the footsteps of elegantly dressed patrons. Waiters moved with military precision, balancing silver trays with drinks and delicate desserts. At a corner table sat a young father and his son, completely out of place among the designer suits and polished watches. The boy, no older than 8, had eyes that sparkled with innocence and intelligence, but he couldn't hear. Every word, every sound, every laugh around him was silent, like a secret world only he could see. Yet his bond with his father was undeniable. A silent conversation flowing between them through hands and gestures. Then, across the room, the billionaire entered. Tall, sharp, and dripping with arrogance, he scanned the room with a look that could freeze fire. His eyes landed on the father and son immediately, and a cruel smirk twisted his face. Leaning toward his companion, he whispered loud enough for half the table to hear. "Talk to your kid? What's the point if he can't even hear you? Isn't that sad?" The words cut through the restaurant like a knife. Patrons glanced briefly, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The father's hands froze mid-sign, his fingers trembling ever so slightly. The boy's eyes flickered toward the billionaire, sensing the tension, yet he smiled. A small, brave smile that didn't waver. The billionaire, noticing the smile, laughed aloud. A cold, hollow sound that echoed off the walls. "How pathetic," he said, loud enough to draw attention. "I'd never waste my time on a child like that." It was then that the waitress, quietly observing the scene from a distance, decided enough was enough. She was young but sharp, with a confidence that didn't need a paycheck to back it up. Walking toward the table, her heels clicked with purpose. Each step saying, "I see what you're doing, and it stops now." "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm and clear, cutting through the billionaire's laughter. "Maybe you should learn to listen before you talk." The words were simple, but in that moment, they carried the weight of justice. Everyone in the restaurant felt it. The arrogance of a man who thought his wealth could silence anyone, and the quiet strength of a young boy who didn't need words to speak volumes. The stage was set. The billionaire had no idea that this waitress, this boy, and this father were about to humble him in a way money could never achieve. The billionaire wasn't content with a few mocking whispers. His arrogance demanded attention, and he made sure the entire restaurant noticed. Leaning slightly toward the boy, he let out a loud, condescending laugh that echoed against the polished walls. "Do you even understand what I'm saying, little boy? Can't you hear me, huh?" he taunted, his voice dripping with cruel amusement. "Maybe your father should have done better, or maybe it's just too late." The father's hands froze midair. His heart raced, but he didn't break. He looked at his son, who met his gaze with unwavering calm, his small hands still moving gracefully in silent conversation. The boy's eyes, full of courage and intelligence, didn't reflect fear. They reflected understanding. He knew the billionaire's words were empty, meaningless noise. Yet the billionaire didn't see courage. He saw weakness. "Honestly, it's kind of pathetic," he sneered to his friend, gesturing toward the boy. "A child who can't hear, a father who can't teach him. What a joke!" The surrounding patrons glanced nervously, sensing the tension. Some shifted in their seats, uncomfortable but hesitant to intervene. The restaurant had never seen such blatant cruelty from someone so wealthy. The billionaire's confidence filled the room like a storm, suffocating everyone in its path. Everyone except the father and his son. That's when the waitress stepped in. She had been observing silently, taking mental notes of every word, every gesture, and every mocking glance. She knew she couldn't let this continue. Not in her restaurant. Not to this boy. With calm determination, she approached the table, her steps deliberate and unwavering. She knelt beside the boy, meeting his eyes with a reassuring smile. Then, in a fluid, precise motion, she began to communicate with him in sign language. The boy's face lit up instantly, his fingers moving in joyful response. Laughter, silent yet pure, spread across his small face. The billionaire froze, unable to comprehend what was happening. He leaned in, trying to follow, but the gestures were a language he had never learned, a world he couldn't touch with money, influence, or power he understands perfectly, the waitress said, turning to face the billionaire with calm authority. And he understands more about respect, patience, and kindness than you ever will. The room went quiet. Every patron held their breath. The arrogance of wealth, the power of status, and the illusion of superiority all collided with the simple, undeniable truth. Some lessons can't be bought. They must be learned. The waitress didn't hesitate. She knelt beside the boy, her movements calm but purposeful, as if the entire room had faded away, and only this small table existed. She began signing to him, her hands moving with fluid precision, graceful and expressive, telling him things the billionaire could never understand. The boy's eyes widened, sparkling with delight. A huge smile spread across his face, a smile that lit up the entire corner of the restaurant. For the first time that evening, there was genuine laughter in the air. Not the hollow, cruel laughter of wealth and arrogance, but the quiet, radiant joy of connection. The billionaire leaned closer, trying to see what was happening, his arrogance giving way to confusion. His expensive suit seemed to shrink under the power of a simple human gesture. Every movement of her hands carried authority, compassion, and confidence. Things he had never bought and never would. "He understands perfectly," she said, turning her gaze toward the billionaire. Her voice was calm but sharp, piercing through the arrogance like a blade. In fact, he understands more about kindness, patience, and respect than you ever will. The billionaire's smirk faltered. For a moment, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Every patron was watching, captivated by a drama money couldn't buy. The father looked on, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. He watched his son laugh silently, his hands moving freely in response, and he knew that the boy had just found an unexpected ally. The waitress continued signing, and the boy mirrored her movements perfectly, their connection electric and undeniable. The billionaire's voice, which had previously dominated the room, was now powerless. No insult, no amount of money, no title could pierce the invisible bond forming between these two. Finally, the waitress stood, her eyes still locked on him. "Some lessons," she said, her tone steady and unwavering, "cannot be taught with arrogance, wealth, or intimidation. Respect is earned, not bought." The billionaire swallowed hard, his ego bruised in a way he hadn't anticipated. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that real power wasn't in wealth. It was in compassion, understanding, and courage. And at that moment, the boy's small, smiling face became the loudest voice in the room. He didn't need to hear to feel victory. The waitress, the father, and the boy together had humiliated his arrogance without a single raised voice, simply with dignity, empathy, and heart. The billionaire sat back in his chair, his usual confidence evaporating like mist under the morning sun. For the first time in his life, money and status couldn't protect him from the truth staring him in the face. He had walked into the restaurant thinking he ruled the room, only to find himself powerless before the simplest act of humanity. The father's eyes, calm but unwavering, met his. There was no anger, no malice, only quiet strength. Every gesture of the father, every smile of the boy, spoke louder than words ever could. The billionaire realized he had underestimated them. He had believed arrogance and wealth were enough to intimidate others, yet here he was, silenced and humbled. The boy laughed silently, his hands moving in joyous conversation with the waitress. That small, innocent laughter carried more power than the billionaire's entire empire. It was a moment the man could not command, buy, or control. He had mocked what he didn't understand, only to discover that the world he thought he dominated operated on rules he could never learn. Love, patience, and respect. The waitress, sensing the shift, approached the billionaire one last time. Her expression was calm, her words deliberate. Some things can't be bought. Respect isn't earned through wealth, and lessons aren't learned through arrogance. Maybe today you'll remember that. The billionaire swallowed, his ego bruised and silent. He looked around and saw every patron witnessing the scene, every eye subtly judging him. For the first time, he felt the weight of humility, an unfamiliar sensation that prickled at the edges of his carefully constructed ego. The father signed to his son. "It's okay. We've shown him what matters." The boy nodded, eyes shining, still laughing silently. There was a quiet victory here, one the billionaire could not touch. The tiny hand of a boy, guided by love and understanding, had toppled the arrogance of a man who thought he owned the world. As the billionaire finally stood and walked away, he felt a strange emptiness. He had wealth, power, and influence, but none of it could replicate the joy, the courage, or the respect that the father, the boy, and the waitress shared in that moment. That night, the billionaire learned that the truest strength lies not in money, but in heart, empathy, and the courage to stand for what is right. The restaurant returned to its normal rhythm, but something had changed forever. For everyone who had witnessed the quiet triumph of love and respect over arrogance and cruelty. The billionaire exited the restaurant in silence, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor. His mind raced, replaying every gesture, every silent laugh, every unspoken word he had witnessed. He had entered that evening thinking he was untouchable, a man who could command attention and respect with money alone. But now, he realized that respect, true respect, could never be bought. At the same time, the young father hugged his son tightly, signing words filled with pride and reassurance. "You did wonderfully, my brave boy," he signed, his hands trembling slightly with emotion. The boy's small hands moved in reply, full of joy, confidence, and a quiet triumph. In that moment, it was clear who the real winners were. The waitress returned to her duties, her posture calm, yet there was a quiet glow about her. She didn't need recognition or applause. Her reward was the happiness and courage she had helped nurture. Patrons who had witnessed the event whispered among themselves, some with admiration, some with introspection. The lesson was clear. Power without compassion is empty. Arrogance without humility is fragile. And love always finds a way to triumph. Even the boy, who could not hear the billionaire's insults, had emerged victorious. His laughter, though silent, had spoken louder than any words. It reminded everyone present that strength isn't measured in wealth, and victory isn't always loud. Sometimes, the quiet courage of a small heart is enough to change everything. That evening, the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm, but the energy had shifted. Patrons carried with them a sense of awe, and the billionaire carried a new understanding, albeit a bitter one, that no amount of money could ever replicate the simple, profound power of kindness, respect, and empathy. The father looked at the waitress and the boy, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Thank you," he said softly. though the words were enough to convey a lifetime of gratitude. The waitress nodded, a gentle smile playing on her lips, knowing that she had made a real difference in the world that night. And the boy? He simply smiled, his hands moving gracefully, full of life and hope, showing the world that sometimes the strongest voices are silent, but their echoes are felt forever. Moral: true strength is not measured by wealth or power, but by love, empathy, and the courage to stand for what is right. Kindness and respect can defeat arrogance, and even the smallest heart can leave the biggest impact.